Michael Jackson was the most famous person on Earth. Everywhere he went, he was surrounded by cameras, screaming fans, and security teams. And yet, even though his life was on full display 24/7, most people don't even know about his insane, hidden life. Behind the fame and the controversy, Michael may have quietly given away more than $500 million to nearly every cause you can think of. Some people call him a saint, others swear he had a much darker side. To this day, few people have been more loved or hated, but the world still doesn't know who he really was. And the truth is stranger, deeper, and crazier than you could possibly imagine. This is the untold story of Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was the 8th of 9 children. His mother was a soft-spoken, kind woman who mostly stayed home to raise her children, but his father, Joe, was the opposite. Joe Jackson wasn't warm, and he wasn't always loving either. He grew up with a difficult father himself, but with his own family, he repeatedly crossed the line from strict to abusive. Joe resented his blue-collar job as a crane operator and saw it as a failure because he always wanted to be a musician. But in the 1960s, he formed a band with his 3 oldest sons after he found out that while he was at work, they were playing with his instruments. At the time, Michael was only 5 years old, but he'd sing and dance alongside his brothers, desperately hoping his father would let him join. When Michael looked up at Joe, he saw the man he wanted to impress more than anything. But when Joe looked down at Michael, he saw his ticket out of poverty. Now, despite being so young, Joe could instantly recognize that Michael had a great singing voice and a real stage presence, so he added him and his other brother to the band's lineup and rebranded it to the Jackson 5. To Joe, it was all about fulfilling his dream of being an artist. So, he forced his kids to do it for him, no matter the cost. During rehearsals, Joe would sit in a chair with a belt in his hand, ready to whip them if they made a mistake. Oftentimes, Michael took the brunt of Joe's abuse.
He would lose his temper. I just remember hearing my mother scream, "Joe, you're gonna kill him, you're gonna kill him, stop it, you're gonna kill him."
Joe worked the boys tirelessly. They practiced every day, performed in every talent show he could find, and to make extra money, he'd even have them perform in strip clubs. Michael hated it, but he was willing to do anything to make his father proud, and he knew better than to disobey him. Eventually, the Jackson 5 gained recognition and had the chance to audition for the founder of one of the biggest record labels in the United States, and he was completely blown away by Michael. It wasn't often that a child had such immense talent, and he knew he'd be a fool to pass up on the chance to sign him, so he did. Jackson Mania, as it was called, ensued almost immediately. In the 1970s, the Jackson 5 released a string of massive hits, which meant that by the time Michael was a teenager, he couldn't even go out in public without being mobbed by fans. By the end of the decade, the Jackson 5 were one of the most popular recording acts of the century. And not only that, but the boys were held up as role models for the black community. Behind the scenes, though, that wasn't always the case. You see, Michael's older brothers loved the tour life, particularly the access it gave them to women. Michael didn't like the way his brothers treated girls. He'd even try to warn them to stay away. Instead of following his brother's bad influence, Michael committed himself to helping the less fortunate, especially children. After all, he knew what it was like to be deprived of a childhood. Back when he was just 13, Michael dressed as Santa Claus and gave gifts to poor kids who otherwise wouldn't have received anything. When Michael was 20, he organized a party for children at the Hollywood Children's Hospital. The kids immediately flocked to him, and Michael took the time to get to know the kids personally, spending hours reading to them and handing out signed albums. For the first time, Michael saw that his music could serve a bigger purpose, and seeing the influence it had on people, he dedicated himself to building it. In 1981, Michael and his brothers were supposed to perform a concert in Atlanta, Georgia, but the city was in the midst of an ongoing and devastating tragedy. Nearly 30 black children and young adults had been kidnapped and killed within the last 2 years. So, instead of their normal show, the Jacksons turned it into a benefit concert and raised over $100,000 in support of the victims and their families. However, as Michael grew older, he set his sights on tackling bigger causes with his own music. By the early 1980s, Michael was beginning to move away from the Jackson 5. Going solo gave him more creative control over his work, which meant that he could finally break free from singing meaningless pop songs about teenage love. This shift proved to be hugely successful. In 1982, Michael released his album, Thriller. It was groundbreaking, and it immediately soared to the top of the charts. To date, it's still the single best-selling album of all time. And yet, when it was released, it was apparently not good enough for television. And this turned Michael into an accidental activist for racial justice. You see, back in the 1980s, MTV was the biggest music TV station in the world.
Welcome to MTV Music Television, the world's first 24-hour stereo video music channel. The best of TV combined with the best of radio. Now, starting right now, you'll never look at music the same way again.
In 1981, when it started, it exclusively played rock music, and it just so happened that the majority of rock musicians at the time were white. Because of this, MTV claimed that it didn't air black artists because it couldn't find any that fit the sound they were looking for. And as more black artists broke into the rock scene, MTV was still not showing them. Therefore, people started to take notice.
I'm just floored by the fact that there's so few black artists featured on it. Why is that?
Billie Jean was the second single on the record, and people couldn't get enough of it. The music video featured slick choreography and a much more mature sound from Michael. Remember, this was long before the internet, and Michael had millions of fans who took every chance they could get to see him. For MTV, showcasing the music video would undoubtedly lead to skyrocketing viewership, but they still resisted and didn't want to play it. Even when the president of Michael's record label threatened to pull all the rights to their music, it wasn't until Billie Jean reached #1 on the Billboard charts that MTV finally relented. This was a big win, but it wasn't just about Michael. It was about all the black artists who now had a chance to be featured on one of music's biggest platforms due to his success. Essentially, he opened the doors for them to freely share their art with the rest of the world. Now, Michael might not have meant to inspire action with Billie Jean, but after this, Michael was now certain that he could use music as a tool to change things that really mattered to him. And at the time, there was one cause that desperately needed attention. In 1983, Ethiopia was in a full-blown crisis. A devastating famine caused by drought, political corruption, and a civil war led to the starvation and death of millions of people in the country's northern region. This was the worst famine to hit the country in over a century. The gravity of the situation broke Michael's heart. He couldn't bear to see anyone, let alone children, in such dire circumstances. But this had to be different. Michael was no stranger to donating money to the less fortunate, but with the fate of an entire country in jeopardy, this was his chance to use his talents to change countless lives and change the way people and artists felt the power of music. As the most famous star in the world, Michael had the potential to do more for the desperate people of Ethiopia than anyone else. He wanted to make giving fashionable and do it by example, so he put together the greatest collaboration of music stars the world had ever seen. The initial effort was organized by Harry Belafonte, best known as the guy who sang this song. He was recruiting other artists to join him in producing a song to raise money, and he already had legendary artists like Lionel Richie and Stevie Wonder on board. At the time, Michael was already on tour, and he had promised to give his entire share of the earnings to various charities. But when his producer called him and told him about the idea of helping Ethiopia, he immediately pledged his full support for it. And not only that, he spent a full week crafting the perfect song with Lionel Richie, something artists of all races and genres could sing together. Michael's generous spirit and passion were infectious. Soon, other musicians began to hear about the song and wanted to get involved. In the end, 45 of the biggest artists of the time recorded the song, and it was like nothing the world had ever heard before. Between the music video, merchandise, and special edition magazine, We Are the World became one of the best-selling singles of all time. It raised over $20 million, which is equivalent to over $230 million today. Most of it went to providing desperately needed food and supplies to Ethiopia, and it was all because Michael used his immense talent and fame to make it happen. You see, as one of the wealthiest performers of his day, Michael could afford to give out massive sums of money. And he did regularly donate millions of dollars to various organizations and programs. But this experience taught him that some causes needed more than just money. Someone willing to stand up and be the face of the movement. An advocate. We Are the World cemented Michael's beliefs in the power of music to bring people together. So in the coming years, he began intentionally writing lyrics to raise awareness for more important causes. But this would launch him into his life's biggest controversy. In the early 1980s, the government began investigating a mysterious and deadly illness that was spreading like a wildfire, especially among gay men. In just a few short years, HIV became a full-blown epidemic, with hundreds of people dying every day. Panic and fear spread across America, and because of a lack of information about HIV, there was widespread prejudice against gay people, which made it difficult for them to receive the treatment they desperately needed. For the public, it was easy to shame an entire group of people, but it proved much harder when the face of HIV changed into one that everyone could easily recognize: a young boy from Indiana, just like Michael Jackson once was. Ryan White contracted HIV from a blood transfusion when he was just 11 years old. Ryan soon became the poster child for HIV. He was proof that it could affect anyone. But due to the fear and ignorance surrounding the virus, he was kicked out of school and shunned by his community. Now, most artists at the time avoided talking about HIV because it was so taboo. But when Michael took notice of Ryan, he was deeply saddened by the discrimination he had faced, and he befriended him anyway. Michael was never afraid to be seen with Ryan in public, and he also offered him his personal support. For example, he bought him a bright red Mustang and invited him to spend vacation with him. Michael did all he could to make sure Ryan enjoyed his last days. He died in 1990 at the age of 18. And in his honor, Michael released the song "Gone Too Soon" on World AIDS Day. Ryan's death wasn't the end of Michael's support for HIV awareness. He still raised awareness for fundraisers, donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to the cause himself, and even publicly urged President Clinton to do something about it.
It is my hope, President-elect Clinton, that you and your administration commit the resources needed to eliminate this awful disease that took my friend.
However, the HIV crisis wasn't the only issue that Michael got involved in the 1980s. He was always supporting multiple causes at a time. For example, in 1987, when Michael was out on tour in Europe to promote his album, Bad, He even held a concert right on the edge of the Berlin Wall, knowing his performance there would be a symbol of the peace and unity he wished Germany had. 50,000 people attended the concert in West Germany, and over 5,000 people gathered on the eastern side at the Brandenburg Gate to hear him perform. After the wall fell in 1989 and the Cold War ended, Michael wrote in his biography, "The wall had fallen before it came down." By this point, Michael was one of the best-selling artists of all time and had had a huge positive impact on dozens of causes. However, even back before the internet, the media tended to focus on the negative or controversial aspects of Michael's life. For example, Michael covered up his body as much as he could and wore masks in public to hide his identity, which made him look mysterious and even creepy to some. Because of this, the press often called him names like Wacko Jacko and spread false rumors about him, like that he was bleaching his entire body and getting cosmetic surgeries because he was ashamed of being black, or that he wanted to change his race. In reality, Michael had a skin condition called vitiligo, which essentially made him allergic to the sun and caused white patches to form all over his body. So he was just trying to dodge the crowds, the media, and the paparazzi. The rumors and harsh words bothered him deeply, and he was annoyed that the media focused more on shallow drama than the important causes he wanted to raise awareness for. So at one point, Michael stopped appearing in the media altogether. However, in the early 90s, he was hit with an accusation that simply couldn't be ignored. As an adult, Michael had befriended several children and their families, like, for example, Ryan White. He also became friends with a 10-year-old boy who appeared in a commercial with him, another 10-year-old who won a Michael Jackson dance competition, and even a 13-year-old he met at his parents' car rental business after his car broke down. All of these children visited Michael's famous Neverland ranch, a massive estate that he had built like an amusement park for the kids he invited to play in. However, in 1993, one of these children claimed that Michael had molested him, and this shocked the world. The media went ballistic. An investigation ensued, and the police ransacked Neverland Ranch, his private bedroom, and basically destroyed his home. Michael, fearing the possibility of a false conviction, settled out of court and ended up paying the boy's family millions of dollars, which led millions of people to believe that Michael was guilty. However, what's clear in this story is that the police found absolutely no incriminating evidence in Neverland Ranch, or his personal home. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of it from Michael. In early 2005, he was again accused of child molestation and faced nearly 2 decades in prison if he was found guilty. The trial was a media frenzy, but eventually Michael was found innocent. The fact remains, he was never convicted of child molestation or any other crime in his entire life. Despite this, though, the court of public opinion was split after the trial. Michael's public image took a serious hit. He lost support and sponsorships, friends, fans, and money. But to him, what hurt the most was the idea that he'd ever harm a child.
Never, ever. I could never harm a child or anyone. It's not in my heart. It's not who I am.
Despite the damaging allegations and the pain they caused, Michael continued making music and using his platform to speak out for causes that mattered to him. In Heal the World, he promoted peace and a desire for everyone to get along. In Earth Song, he defended the environment and spoke out against its destruction. In They Don't Care About Us, he spoke out against police brutality and government corruption. And in Man in the Mirror, he reminded the world that change can only start from within. Now, aside from writing songs to raise awareness for these causes, Michael donated millions of dollars to the various organizations supporting them, and he often did it anonymously. He also visited hospitals and brought the sick children toys so they could feel like children again, something he was missing from his childhood.
I do on my off days. I do as many hospitals as I do concerts. I do as many orphanages as I do concerts. But because it's good news, the press don't cover it. They want bad news. But I do it from my heart. I don't do it to wave a flag and say, look at me.
It's paradoxical. With all his money and his power, Michael could have bought nearly anything he could possibly dream of, except the one thing he wanted more than anything: a normal life.
I go around the world dealing with running and hiding. I can't take a walk in the park. I can't go to the store. I have to hide in a room. You feel like you're in prison.
In many ways, Michael's extraordinary fame made his life feel like a prison, and it even extended to his kids. He wanted them to have normal lives, but for them to experience the things most people take for granted, Michael would have to rent out entire supermarkets and bookstores and hire people to act as regular shoppers. His fame haunted him, yet it was his deep empathy for others, especially children, that guided his path. Even though he was all over the news all the time, most people hardly knew about any of the good he did, because Michael was almost always working quietly in the background, giving to people without needing to be in the spotlight. Some people estimate that Michael may have given somewhere around $500 million to charity over his lifetime, which, adjusted for inflation, is more like $1.5 to $2 billion. But one thing is for sure: his kind spirit and generosity will always be remembered by everyone he helped. The true size of his philanthropic work will never be known, because for every documented contribution, there are so many more that we'll never know about, because that's the way Michael wanted it. And that is the real story of Michael Jackson, a man with a lot of talent, a lot of wealth, and a lot of fame, but even more generosity. But what if the real hidden side of Michael Jackson was his skills in the kitchen? Well, not really. But if you want to see the story of Marco Pierre White, the celebrity chef who turned philosopher, watch this video next. I'll see you there.